Tonight I want to speak to you on the subject, the man who snapped. The word snapped is in quotes. This week, at a state university in Ohio, which is financed by tax money, local, state, and national, namely Bowling Green State University, Bowling Green, Ohio. Two writers appeared on that campus who say that they spent 5 years researching religious cults. The man's name is Jim Siegelman, the woman Flo Conaway, and they've written a book entitled Snapped. According to an Associated Press release this week, they listed the Way International among the top 5 cults of the United States. That's us. They said that cults, quote, are distinguished by a process of mind control called, quote, again, snapping, end of quote. The term describing, quote, the sudden change in a person's mind. Tonight, the man who snapped. Acts chapter 5. Verse 18, please. And laid their hands on the apostles and put them in a common prison, a public prison. Verse 28, saying, did not we straitly command you that you should not teach in his name? And behold, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than what? Men. Verse 33. When they heard that, they were cut to the heart and took counsel to slay them. Then stood there up one in the council, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a PhD, a doctor of the what? One of the great leaders, educators, teachers of that day and time, who was held in reputation among all the people, and commanded to put the apostles forth a little space. Verse 35. And said unto them, ye men of Israel, take heed to yourself what ye intend to do as touching these men. For before these days rose up Theudas, boasting himself to be somebody, to whom a number of men, about 400, joined themselves, who was slain, and all as many as obeyed him were scattered and brought to naught. After this man rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of the taxing, and drew away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obey him, were scattered or dispersed. And now, verse 38, I say unto you, refrain from these men, and let them alone. For if this counsel or this work be of men, it will come to what? But, verse 39, if it be of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest haply ye be found even to fight against who? God. This was the great Gamaliel, the leading educator and teacher of his time. Gamaliel was perhaps the most outstanding educator and leader of his day and of his time. You must remember this, because today parents are very proud sometimes when their young people can graduate from the so-called recognized great schools of the world. Paul, I believe, as we shall see, graduated from one of those great schools. And his parents must have been tremendously proud of their successful young man. We turn to Acts chapter 7. The young man who was most likely to succeed. Acts 7:58, a remarkable record. When Stephen was being stoned, they cast Stephen out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses who stoned him, those who witnessed and participated in his execution, laid down their clothes at a young man's feet whose name was what? Saul. On that occasion, Saul was present. That happens to be his Hebrew name. His Greek name is Paul. They laid down their clothes at the feet of a man named Saul. In Acts 22, and in verse 20, we have the following record where the declaration of the word says, "And when the blood of thy martyr Stephen was shed, I also, Paul, was standing by and consenting unto his death, and kept the raiment of them that did" what? Here was a young man standing by, consenting to it, agreeing with the death of the execution of a man by the name of Stephen. And not only was he there, but he was in a position of authority and of power. In the 22nd chapter of Acts here, and in the 3rd verse, you read this great record. "I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in" what? Tarsus, a city in Cilicia. Tarsus was a very influential city. Brought up in the city at the feet of who? Gamaliel. Gamaliel, the outstanding educator of his day and time. Did this Saul or this Paul man have a good education? The finest money could buy. And in order to go to that academic school, so to speak, Daddy and Mommy had to be a little on the totem pole. They were not poverty-stricken people. They were not people who could not afford $300 a month donation. Gamaliel, top Harvard of its day. People, you got to see the greatness of the word. His parents must have been proud as peacocks at Easter. That's when the peacocks are full-fledged, you know, in all their gorgeous. To have their wonderful son accepted, and you just didn't get accepted to sit at the feet of Gamaliel unless you had ability.